Hello, welcome to Miss Peepers Reading Corner. I'm Katrina, aka Miss Peepers. Let's talk about books. Today we're doing the time and place tag. This tag was created by Carl at Please Read Your Book, and I was tagged by Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading. I will link both of those creators below. I encourage you to check them out if you haven't already. There are 5 prompts in this tag. So the first one is a book that reminds you of your past. And I could go in a bunch of different directions on this one, but the direction I'm choosing is Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. So this book is one that I have read many times. I came across this book when I was a teenager, probably shortly after the movie came out, or maybe right before, somewhere in there. I loved the movie and I read the book and I loved the book. This is, in case you don't know, the story of a really rich guy who hires some scientists to figure out how to clone dinosaurs based on mosquitoes trapped in amber that back in the time of the dinosaurs sucked up dino blood. They're able to get some DNA out of that and make a theme park because that's what humans do. Anyway, surprising no one except perhaps the guy running the show, things go horribly awry when of course he happens to have a bunch of people visiting before he does his grand opening. So dinosaurs run amok, people die, lots of adventure, lots of running around, and while there are a lot of differences between the book and the movie, the adaptation of the first movie, I'm only going to talk about the first movie. There have been a lot of movies. I have all sorts of opinions about the franchise as a whole, but the first movie is still the best. The first book is still the best. There were only 2, Jurassic Park and The Lost World. The first book is still the best. I think what struck me most about this book as a teenager, looking back, I didn't pick up on this consciously, but just in reflection, introspection, the heroes of this book are all scientists and academics. I think for me, my nerdy young self, that spoke to me in a way that a lot of action movies and thrillers and horror movies didn't, in that these are people that I actually kind of wanted to be like. And it felt within reach to me to be someone who gets an education and lives sort of a cerebral life. And for that to be someone who could also be an action hero to save the day, to help shut down this park and rescue at least some of the people who were threatened by dinosaurs. Not everyone makes it out alive, I'll just tell you that right now. But I did really, I was able to identify with the heroes of this story as a teenager. I remember I guess it was middle school when I read this, that I would read it, get to the end, go back to the beginning and start again. And I must have read this book 20, 30, maybe 40 times. And while it is not technically dystopian sci-fi, it's sort of adjacent to that genre, and it is certainly sci-fi, and it is certainly sci-fi about things going horribly wrong. And that's always spoken to me for some reason. I don't know. That probably says something about me as a person, but there we are. That's the point of this tag, to say something about me as a person. This is a comfort read, as weird as that might sound. This is a comfort read and I love it. The next prompt is a book set in a place that you want to visit but have not. I haven't done a ton of traveling, so this could be a really long list, but I decided to pick one based on a book that I actually really want to talk about, which is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. I read this last year. This is a historical fiction, mystery, sort of philosophical discussion on religion and politics. It's a lot of things. So this is set in Italy in the Middle Ages in a monastery, and we follow a monk and his apprentice who are coming to visit this monastery in preparation for a political conference between the church and the state. And when these 2 monks arrive, the abbot who runs this monastery tells them that someone has died and it's a bit suspicious. And he heard that this monk has a history of solving mysteries. This is not actually a series, but it very much reads like one, which is pretty cool. And he wants him to look into this and see if he can figure out what happened. Very specifically, it looks like the monk committed suicide. And of course, that's huge sin in the eyes of the Catholic Church. And so the abbot wants this monk to prove that that's not what happened. But also, if he could make sure it doesn't look like murder, that would be great too. Unfortunately, murder is exactly what it is, and this is a mystery. I really like the structure of this book, that it follows, it goes through 7 days, which of course is biblically relevant. 7 days creation. This is a really in-depth book, and I just loved it so much. And I would love to read it again so that I can really get my thoughts together on how I would even talk about this, but it was just, it's so rich. The historical context is, like, you can tell, I mean, Umberto Eco was a professor. He studied this time period. He studied medieval time. The setting and the time period and the characters are so rich. I loved this book so much, and I recommend it. And Italy is a place that I have never been and would love to go sometime. The next prompt is a book set in a foreign country that you admire, and this is an interesting and challenging question. There is, of course, no such thing as a perfect country, and I'm including my own in that. Every place has flaws, but I actually have 2 books from the same place: Mind's Eye by Hakan Nesser and Faceless Killers by Henning Mankell. I probably butchered those pronunciations, for which I apologize. These are both Swedish mysteries, which is amusing to me in that there are actually a lot of really great crime novels written by Swedish authors set in Sweden, but their crime rate is actually quite low relative to other countries. So that's, of course, one thing that I admire. This is also a place I'd love to go that I have not before. I work in corporate America. That is my day job that pays the bills and keeps me in books. And one thing that frequently comes up with Sweden and Norway and Denmark, areas in that, the countries in that area, is a lot of the West, particularly the US, but a lot of the West has a tendency to prioritize corporations and, you know, work until you die at your desk and that kind of approach. Burn yourself out, don't take vacation, don't take parental leave, all of this stuff. And so I love hearing about countries like Sweden and Norway and Denmark and that take very seriously the need to both work but also rest. It's a very different sort of vibe in the yes, what is it? What's wrong? What do you need? Did Timmy fall down the well? What's going on? What's going on? At any rate, I really appreciate everything that I've heard about the way that people in Sweden approach work. And it also, just from what I've seen, looks like just a gorgeous country. I know there's a lot of, especially in winter, a lot of like stark, cold landscape, but that's beautiful in its own way. So another place I'd love to go, and also a culture that I admire. Number 4 is a book that's set in a city, province, district that you live in. So I live in the United States in Virginia, and because I wanted to use books that are in my own collection for this video, I had a surprisingly hard time with this. There are, of course, lots of books that are set in Virginia. Certainly, Patricia Cornwell lives in this state, and a number of her books are set here. Of course, Washington, D.C. is right to the north of us, and even though that's technically not in Virginia, it's adjacent. But I did find one in my collection, and that is She Would Be King by Y.A. Moore. And this is not fully set in Virginia, but parts of it are. So this is a debut novel, and I love sometimes when you read someone's first novel and you're like, this is your first novel? What are you going to do next? This is a gorgeous novel that takes place during the founding of Liberia in Africa, and there are characters from different places. One of them is a slave in Virginia who eventually becomes freed and goes to Liberia. There's a supernatural element to it, but it's not fully fantasy. It's less supernatural than fantasy, but more supernatural than magical realism. So it rides the line in there a bit. I loved it and highly recommend. The last prompt is a book set in the future that you think is or will be realistic. Now, I love a dystopian sci-fi novel. I'm all about the dystopian fiction. So I had a lot to choose from, and I really sat down and thought about this one. I could probably make a whole separate video on this topic of different dystopian novels and how some aspects of those books are coming true. There are a lot that I could choose from, but here's another first novel. This is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. This book is actually set about 20 years from now, so I don't think it'll come true that quickly, fully, but I'll get into what aspects of this I think are realistic. But it's set in a future where basically society is barely holding on. There are chasms between social classes. Our protagonist lives in a lower income community, and folks live in these trailers that are stacked up on each other. So you've got this sort of precarious balancing of buildings, and they are very prone to falling over or caving in, or you have the slightest bit of structural damage and the whole tower comes down, it hits the one next to it, and just so there's a lot of risk of just physical devastation, and people tend to disappear into virtual reality. Children go to school in VR, people go to work in VR, and they have these really elaborate setups where you're like standing on a treadmill so you can move around, and like that's the exercise most people get. People don't come out of virtual reality any more often than they have to. Basically, you're eating and you're sleeping, and then you're going right back into the machine. And so what ends up happening is that a tech mogul type person dies and leaves behind a series of puzzles that he says, anyone who can solve these inherits my fortune. And so, of course, our protagonist decides that he wants to be the person who solves all of this. And so it's really well done. This was a film adaptation. I didn't love the movie. I didn't feel like it really fully adhered to the spirit of the book. That's just me. Others may disagree. I don't always say the book is better, but in this case, I say the book is better. The reason that I see this as realistic, we're making some serious advances in virtual reality to the point where like the systems, the rigs that people have in this book, we're pretty close to being able to the average person being able to have those, which to me is a little bit terrifying. I get motion sickness in those things. And so while I hope we're not 20 years from everyone living entirely online, I do think that that is a possibility, that we would have the technology soon to be able to do that. Whether people do it or not is a whole separate thing. But I know there's a segment of the population that reads this and is like, oh yeah, let's all jack in. I am not one of them. I'll stay out here in my Luddite, with my Luddite self and my paper books. Okay, that's it. This is my stack of time and place books. Everything in this pile I've read and enjoyed and would recommend. So if any of these sounded interesting to you, definitely pick them up. The next thing is to tag other people. So I'm going to tag Katie Marie, Danny Dabbles, and Emmy, who are 3 creators that I enjoy very much. And if you are watching this and have not been tagged but want to do this tag, if you've got a channel, please do it. If you don't have a channel and want to hop in the comments and tell me what your answers would be to some or all of these questions, I'd love to hear it. And until then, I will see you in the next one.